My fiance's wealthy parents despised me before we even met. On the way to their mansion one stormy night, I stopped to help a blind man cross a dangerous highway. I arrived over an hour late, soaked and dirty, ready to be kicked out of the family. But then I discovered something that would change my life forever. That man was never real. Before we begin, I have a question for you. What was the most stressful moment you've ever had, or heard about, when meeting your partner's family? Leave it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more impactful stories every day. Now let's head to that lonely road in Ashford, Ohio, where a simple rainy night would forever change the life of this young nurse speaking to you. The rain beat against the windshield like machine gun bullets, each drop exploding against the glass with the force of an accusation. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, my fingernails digging into my palms, leaving crescent-shaped marks. It was 7:47 on a cursed Friday night, and I should have been sitting at the Morrisons' table 47 minutes ago. 47 minutes late for the most important wedding anniversary dinner of my life. The speedometer read 45 on a road where the speed limit was 55, but the conditions didn't allow for anything more. Every turn was a gamble with death, every break a test of faith. And as I battled the elements, a single word echoed in my mind like a desperate mantra: catastrophe. My name is Rosalie Simpson. I am 28 years old. I am a registered nurse at Ashford General Hospital. And at that moment, driving through the muddy roads of Ashford, Ohio, I had no idea that I was about to discover the most disturbing and shocking truth about the family I thought I knew. A truth that would make me question everything I believed about love, trust, and the limits of human manipulation. The rain had started 3 hours earlier, when I was still at the hospital finishing my double shift. Diane Morrison, my future mother-in-law, had called twice to remind me about the importance of dinner, as if I could forget, as if she would let me forget. "Rosalie, dear," her voice had sounded over the phone with that poisonous sweetness I had learned to fear. "You know how Richard and I value punctuality. It's a matter of respect, isn't it?" Respect. Diane Morrison's favorite word. She used it like a weapon, always pointed in my direction. I had promised to be there at 7 sharp. I had even left the hospital 15 minutes early, lying to my supervisor about an urgent medical appointment. Diane Morrison had the power to make me lie, and it made me sick. But then the accident on Route 23 happened. 2 cars collided in the rain, blocking 2 of the 3 lanes. Traffic came to a complete standstill. I watched helplessly as the minutes ticked by on the dashboard clock. 7:15, 7:30. My phone started to vibrate. Brian's first message was just concerned. "Babe, where are you? My parents are asking." The second one had a tone of irritation. "Rose, this is serious. My mom is starting to make comments." The third was when I knew I was really in trouble. "Rosalie, please tell me you didn't forget. My mom is saying this is exactly the kind of behavior she expected." Diane Morrison had decided to hate me from the first day Brian brought me to meet her. I never understood exactly why. Whether it was because I was a nurse and not a doctor, because my family wasn't wealthy, or simply because I wasn't the high society princess she had dreamed of for her only son. During the 9 months Brian and I were engaged, she had subjected me to a series of subtle and not-so-subtle tests. Comments about my clothes. "Oh dear, that's interesting." Invasive questions about my finances. "Do nurses make good money these days?" And the constant implication that I was still on probation to be part of the Morrison family. Brian always downplayed his mother's behavior. "She just wants to make sure you're the right person for me," he would say. "It's her way of showing she cares." But I knew the truth. Diane Morrison didn't want to make sure I was the right person. She wanted to prove I was the wrong one. At 7:45, the traffic finally started moving. I pressed down on the gas pedal harder than I should have, causing the car to skid slightly on the wet asphalt. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. Maybe if I drove fast enough, if I came up with a convincing enough excuse, I could still save the night. That's when I saw him. Through the thick curtain of rain, a lone figure stood on the shoulder of the highway. A man wearing a dark overcoat that was soaked and clinging to his body, a white cane in his right hand, his face turned toward the traffic passing by at 70 miles per hour. Even from a distance, through the distortion of the rain on the windshield, I could see that he was shaking violently. My first reaction, my instinctive, natural, selfish reaction, was to keep driving. I was already late. Brian was probably making a face while his parents made increasingly snide comments about my absence. Diane was probably relishing every minute of my failure, collecting ammunition to use against me for months to come. But there was something about the way that man stood that hit me like a punch in the stomach. The way he tilted his head, trying to catch the sound of passing cars. The cane he held so tightly that his knuckles must have been white. The way he took small, hesitant steps toward the road, backed away, tried again. He wasn't just waiting for help. He was desperate. I felt my foot ease off the accelerator almost against my will. My heart was torn in two, half screaming at me to keep driving, to save my own skin, and the other half reminding me why I had become a nurse in the first place, to help people. I pulled over to the shoulder about 20 yards ahead of him and turned on my hazard lights. Through the rearview mirror, I saw that he had stopped moving, his head tilted as if trying to understand what was happening. For a moment, I just sat there in the car, my hands on the steering wheel, listening to the rain pounding on the roof. I knew that if I got out of that car, if I got involved in whatever situation that man was in, I would be even later for dinner. And being late meant more anger from Diane, more disappointment from Brian, more evidence that I didn't really belong in that family. But I also knew that if I drove away, if I left that man alone in the storm, I would never forgive myself. I took a deep breath, grabbed my umbrella from the back seat, and got out of the car. The rain hit me like a solid wall. Within seconds, I was soaked to the bone, my dress, which I had chosen carefully to impress the Morrisons, sticking to my body. My high heels sank into the mud on the side of the road with every step. "Sir?" I shouted over the deafening noise of the rain and traffic. "Do you need help?" He turned toward my voice with such a sudden movement that he almost lost his balance. He was a middle-aged man, perhaps in his 50s, with wet gray hair plastered to his forehead and sunglasses even in the complete darkness of the storm. There was something deeply disturbing about his expression, a mixture of desperate relief and barely contained panic. "Please," he said, his voice hoarse, as if he had been screaming for hours. "Please, I need to get across this road. They'll find me if I stay here." I approached slowly, trying not to scare the man, but also trying to assess the situation. There was something about his movements that didn't add up. Sometimes he looked directly at me, other times his head moved erratically, as if he were trying to locate where my voice was coming from. "Who's going to find you?" I asked, having to shout to be heard over the traffic noise. "The place," he replied, his hands shaking on his cane. "The place I ran away from. They kept me there, against my will. I managed to get out during the storm, but they'll realize I'm gone. They always do." My stomach clenched. Ran away? Held against his will? This sounded dangerously like some kind of mental institution, or perhaps something even worse. My nurse's mind immediately went to work, assessing signs of trauma, abuse, neglect. "What's your name, sir?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and professional despite the chaos around us. "Thomas," he said immediately. Then he hesitated for a long moment before adding, "Thomas Anderson." The hesitation caught my attention. In my experience in the hospital, people who hesitate before giving their last names usually have a reason for doing so. "Thomas, I'm going to help you cross the road," I said, positioning myself beside him. "But after that, I need to take you to a hospital, okay? To get you warm, dry, and to make sure you're okay." "No!" he shouted, so loud and with such force that I instinctively recoiled. "No hospitals! They have people in hospitals. They have people everywhere. Please, just help me cross. That's all I need." The panic in his voice was genuine, or at least it sounded genuine. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. A theatrical quality, perhaps, as if he were reciting lines he had rehearsed. I should have trusted that instinct. I should have asked more questions. I should have insisted on calling the police, or at least contacting social services. But I was in a hurry. I was anxious. I was more concerned with my own drama than with the inconsistencies in his story. "All right," I said finally. "Let's cross. But slowly, okay? And you need to listen to me carefully." Crossing a four-lane highway with a supposedly blind man during a storm that reduced visibility to practically zero was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Every step was a gamble with death, every passing car like a guided missile traveling at lethal speeds. Thomas clung to my left arm with a strength that was leaving marks on my skin through the wet fabric of my dress. His fingers were like claws, digging into my flesh with such intensity that I knew I would have bruises the next day. But what really disturbed me were the things he whispered as we walked. "They use blue cars," he muttered as a blue sedan passed dangerously close to us. "Always blue cars. That's how you recognize them." "Thomas, it's okay," I said, trying to sound confident, but my own voice was shaking as much as my body. "We're almost to the other side. They have cameras too," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Small cameras, in places you'd never think to look. They watch everything." A truck passed so close that I felt its wind push us slightly. Thomas stopped suddenly, forcing me to stop too. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his head tilted. "The truck? It was just a truck, Thomas." "No," he said, his voice getting even lower. "The sound. They make a specific sound. They're cars, like they have special equipment." I was starting to get really worried. The man clearly had serious mental problems, and I was in the middle of a highway during a storm trying to keep him alive while he raved about paranoid conspiracies. When we finally made it to the other side of the road, we were both shaking uncontrollably, him from fear, me from adrenaline and exhaustion. I let go of his arm and leaned against the guardrail, trying to catch my breath. "There," I said. "You're across. Now please let me take you to—" "You saved my life," he interrupted, turning to face me. And that's when I noticed something that should have alerted me immediately. For just a second, a brief second, Thomas looked directly into my eyes. Not vaguely in my direction, not trying to locate my voice, directly into my eyes, with perfect focus. But the moment passed so quickly that I thought maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just the rain distorting my vision. "Thank you," he said, his voice suddenly firmer, more controlled. "You're a good person. They need to know that." "Who needs to know?" But he was already walking away, striding with a confidence that seemed strange for someone who had been so disoriented just minutes before. In a matter of seconds, he had disappeared into the darkness of the storm, leaving me alone, soaked, confused, and more than an hour late for the most important dinner of my life. As I staggered back to my car, my mind was in turmoil. I had just been through a traumatic experience, and now I needed to pull myself together enough to face the Morrisons and come up with an explanation that didn't sound completely insane. My reflection in the rearview mirror was frightening. My hair, which I had spent an hour doing, was completely destroyed. My makeup had run, leaving black streaks on my face. My dress, an expensive dress I had bought specifically for this occasion, was soaked, covered in mud, and torn in 2 places. I looked like someone who had been in a car accident, or kidnapped, or anything but an elegant dinner with my fiancé's family. I turned the heater on full blast and tried to dry myself off a little during the rest of the trip. As I drove, I practiced my explanation out loud. "I'm sorry I'm late, but I had to help a blind man cross the highway in the storm." It sounded absurd even to me. I know it sounds crazy, but there was a man standing alone in the rain. Even worse. No matter how I phrased it, the story sounded like an excuse too elaborate to be true. And knowing Diane Morrison, she would immediately assume I was lying to cover up some infidelity or irresponsibility. My phone had stopped ringing about 20 minutes ago. That was even more sobering than the angry messages. It meant Brian had given up trying to contact me. It meant the family had moved on without me. It meant I was officially in disgrace. The Morrison home was in Willowbrook Estates, a neighborhood where every house cost more than I would earn in 10 years. It was the kind of place where the lawns were perfect even in winter, where the driveways never had a leaf out of place, where every family had at least 2 luxury German cars. The house itself was a 3-story colonial mansion, with white columns that stretched from the porch to the roof. It was intimidating on normal days. On a rainy night, with all the windows lit up and me in my sorry state, it looked like a courtroom waiting to judge me. When I finally arrived at 9:15, I expected to find a battlefield. I expected screams as soon as I rang the doorbell. I expected accusations about my thoughtlessness. I expected perhaps even Brian waiting for me at the door to end our engagement in front of his parents, sparing the Morrison family the shame of having such an unsuitable daughter-in-law. Instead, I found a calm that was infinitely more unsettling. Diane opened the door before I even rang the doorbell, as if she had been watching me through the window. She was impeccable, as always. Her blonde hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, wearing a navy blue cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But what shocked me wasn't her appearance, it was her expression. She didn't look angry. In fact, she was smiling. Not the fake, cutting smile I had learned to recognize, but something that seemed genuinely satisfied. "Rosalie, dear," she said, and her voice had a sweetness I had never heard before. "We were worried about you. My God, you're soaking wet. Come inside, quickly." I stood in the doorway for a moment, dripping onto the Morrisons' Persian rug, completely confused by the reception. Where were the sarcastic comments? Where was the look of disappointment? Where was the lecture on punctuality and respect? Brian appeared behind his mother, and he too was strangely calm. His face showed concern, genuine concern, instead of the irritation I had expected. "Babe, are you okay?" he asked, coming over to give me a hug, seemingly unconcerned by the fact that I was wet and dirty. "You look... Jesus, what happened to you?" I started, but the words wouldn't come out. The difference between what I expected and what I was finding was so drastic that my mind couldn't process it. "She was helping someone," Diane said before I could finish my sentence. There was something in the way she said it, as if she already knew the whole story. "Helping someone?" Brian repeated. "A blind man," I said finally, my voice still weak. "He needed to cross the highway in the storm. I'm sorry I'm late. I know how important this dinner was." "That's so sweet of you," Diane said. And there was something in her eyes I couldn't quite place, something that seemed triumphant. That's exactly the kind of person we want in our family. Richard Morrison appeared from the back of the house, a tall, imposing man with gray hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. He greeted me with a nod that was almost respectful. "Rosalie," he said, "Diane told me about your good deed tonight. Very impressive." She did? How could she have told him when I had just arrived? The dinner that followed was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Diane had lent me a dry outfit, one of her own that was far too expensive and formal for the occasion, but at least it made me feel human again. The Morrisons, who normally bombarded me with questions about my career plans, my finances, my family, my hobbies, my friends, pretty much every aspect of my life, barely spoke to me during the meal. Instead, they talked to each other in hushed tones, exchanged meaningful glances that I couldn't interpret, and occasionally looked at me in a way that made me feel like I was an interesting specimen in a laboratory. "How's the soup, dear?" Diane asked at one point, but there was something about the way she asked the question that seemed to carry much more weight than a simple courtesy. "It's delicious," I replied, though I had barely been able to eat. My stomach was still churning from the experience with Thomas, and the strange atmosphere at the table wasn't helping. "I'm glad," she said, exchanging a glance with her husband. "We made everything especially for you." Brian was silent for most of the meal, which was unusual for him. He usually tried to fill uncomfortable silences with jokes or changes of subject, but tonight he seemed to be observing as much as the parents. "Brian," I said finally, "are you okay? You seem distant." "I'm just processing," he replied, but didn't elaborate on what exactly he was processing. During dessert, an elaborate tiramisu that had probably taken hours to make, Diane began asking more direct questions. "Rosalie, tell me more about this man you helped," she said, her voice too casual. "What was he like?" "He was a middle-aged man," I replied hesitantly. "Gray hair. He said his name was Thomas Anderson. He seemed to be running away from somewhere he was being held against his will." "How awful," Diane murmured, but there was something in her eyes that didn't match her words. "And weren't you afraid? A young woman alone, stopping to help a stranger in a storm?" "I was afraid," I admitted. "But he needed help. I couldn't just drive away." "Of course not," Richard said, his voice having a tone of approval I'd never heard before. "You did the right thing." The right thing. Why did that sound like he was evaluating me? After dessert, Richard excused himself to watch the game in the TV room. Brian said he had an urgent work call that couldn't wait until Monday. That left me alone with Diane, who was clearing the table with a domestic efficiency that seemed almost rehearsed. "Rosalie," she said without looking up from the dishes, "can you come with me to the office? There's something I'd like to show you." Something in her tone made me hesitate. "What is it?" "It's a surprise," she said, finally looking at me. And there was something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. Something that will change everything. The Morrison office was a place that always intimidated me. It was clearly designed to impress and intimidate. Dark mahogany walls, bookshelves filled with law and business books, framed diplomas and certificates from prestigious universities, a huge oak desk that dominated the center of the room. But that night, what caught my attention most was the sophisticated electronic equipment that had been set up on a side table. Monitors, recorders, devices I didn't recognize, but were clearly high-tech surveillance equipment. Diane closed the door behind us with a click that sounded final. She positioned herself between me and the exit, a move that seemed casual but effectively trapped me in the room. "Sit down," she said, pointing to a leather chair in front of the desk. "Diane, what's going on?" I asked, but I obeyed. Something about the room, her expression, the way she had closed the door, told me that resistance would be futile. She turned on one of the monitors and began fiddling with some controls. The screen remained black for a moment, then began to display a computer interface I didn't recognize. "Rosalie," she said, not looking at me as she navigated through the menus. "Do you remember when you and Brian first started dating? When I told you that our family has very high standards?" "Yes," I replied cautiously. "And do you remember when I said it would take time for you to prove you were right for our son?" My heart began to race. "Diane, you're scaring me." She finally turned to look at me, and her smile was a terrible thing to see. Cold, calculating, and completely without regret. "Well, honey," she said, "we take this very seriously, more seriously than you could ever imagine." The screen lit up, and I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. It was a recording, from inside my car, from tonight. I saw myself driving in the rain, pulling over to the side of the road, getting out of the car. I saw my conversation with Thomas, our dangerous crossing of the highway, our final dialogue before he disappeared into the darkness. Everything was recorded in perfect high definition, with crystal clear audio. "You—" My voice failed me. I tried again. "You put cameras in my car?" "Not just cameras," Diane said, and there was genuine pride in her voice. "Audio devices on your phone, real-time GPS tracking, monitoring of your social media accounts, interception of emails. We knew where you were, who you talked to, what you bought, every moment of the last 6 months." I rose from my chair so quickly that I almost fell over. My legs were wobbly, my vision was blurry. "This is crazy. This is criminal. This is—" "It's protection," she replied, her voice cutting like a knife. "Brian is our only son, Rosalie. He will inherit Morrison and Associates. He will inherit the family properties. He will inherit a fortune that took 3 generations to build. We couldn't risk him marrying someone unsuitable." "So you spied on me? You violated my privacy in every way possible?" "We did our due diligence," Richard said, entering the room silently. I hadn't heard him open the door. "As we would with any major investment." Investment. He was referring to his son's marriage as an investment. "And I must admit, Rosalie," Diane continued, "you almost failed a few times. That bartender at Mulligan's Pub, Jake Morrison, ironically the same last name as ours, you talked to him for 43 minutes on a Thursday night. You laughed together. You touched his arm twice." I remembered that night. I had gone out with co-workers after a particularly difficult shift. The bartender had been friendly, nothing more. That personal trainer at the gym, Marcus Williams, you exchanged phone numbers. You texted each other for 3 weeks. Marcus had helped me with an exercise program. He had sent me diet and motivational tips, nothing romantic. The massage therapist, Linda Chen, you visited her spa 5 times in 2 months, always paying cash. I suffered from back pain from long shifts at the hospital. The massages were therapeutic. "We were almost convinced you were cheating," Diane said, pausing the recording on an image of me getting out of the car in the storm. "Almost. But then tonight happened." she continued, leaning forward in her chair, and it changed everything. What do you mean? I asked, though part of me was already beginning to suspect the horrible answer. The blind man, Rosalie, Thomas Anderson. Her voice was filled with a morbid satisfaction. He wasn't real. The world stopped. The air left my lungs. What? We hired him. His real name is Jake Patterson. He's a professional actor who specializes in portraying people with disabilities for independent films and commercials. We paid him $1,500 to pretend he was blind, pretend he was in danger, and test how you would react when you were under extreme pressure. I felt like I had been struck by lightning. All the air had been sucked out of the room. You did this to me? You made me believe I was saving someone's life? It was the final test, Diane said, and there was genuine triumph in her voice. You were over an hour late for our dinner, an event I made very clear was extremely important to our family. You were under incredible pressure, anxious, afraid of disappointing us. Your fiancé was sending increasingly angry messages. You knew that every minute you were late was costing you dearly. Tears began to stream down my face, but I didn't even feel them. You manipulated me. You turned an act of human kindness into a test of character, Richard finished, crossing his arms. And you passed, Rosalie, brilliantly. Diane turned on another monitor, showing more angles of the recording. An unfaithful woman, a woman who was using the night as a cover for a date, would have used the situation as the perfect excuse. Sorry I'm late, but I had to help someone. The perfect excuse to hide an infidelity. But you didn't do that, Richard added. You genuinely sacrificed your own well-being to help a stranger in need, even though you knew it would cost you dearly. We saw your body language, Diane continued, pointing to the screen. The way you hesitated before stopping. The internal struggle you had. You wanted to keep driving, any sensible person would have, but your compassionate nature won out. I was shaking uncontrollably. How could you do that? How could you put me in real danger, crossing a highway in a storm just to test me? Jake is an experienced professional, Diane said casually. He has safety training for stunts. We had a safety crew positioned at a safe distance. You were never in any real danger. But I didn't know that, I shouted. I thought I was risking my life. I thought I was saving someone's life. Exactly, Richard said. And that was the point. We needed to see who you really were when you thought no one was watching. Diane turned off the monitors and stood up, walking over to a window that looked out onto the Morrisons' perfectly manicured garden. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, but I felt like I was in the middle of an emotional hurricane. So, she said without turning to look at me, now you know the truth. The question is, what are you going to do with that information? I was in total shock, but anger was beginning to rise in my chest. I'm going to tell Brian. I'm going to tell everyone what you've done. I'm going to the police. This is a crime. Invasion of privacy, illegal surveillance, coercion. Are you really going to do that? Diane asked, finally turning to face me. And you think anyone will believe you? A young nurse with a salary of $45,000 a year against a respected family in the community, with political and business connections that extend throughout the state of Ohio? The threat was clear, but there was something else in her eyes. Besides, she continued, returning to her chair behind the desk, you passed the test, Rosalie. You proved you're worthy of being part of this family. Brian is out there right now, waiting to make you an official marriage proposal, in front of our closest friends, who are arriving in half an hour. You really want to throw all that away because of a little misunderstanding? Misunderstanding? I repeated, incredulous. You've been spying on me for 6 months. You've violated every aspect of my privacy. You've manipulated me. We protect our family, Richard said coldly. That's what families do. They protect each other. Does he know? I asked, my voice almost a whisper. Does Brian know what you've done? Diane and Richard exchanged glances. Brian knows we look out for the family's interests, Diane said finally. What he doesn't need to know are the specific details of how we do that. She stood up and came over to me, placing a hand on my shoulder like a mother comforting a daughter. But her touch made me feel nauseous. Rosalie, you can see this as a violation, she said, her voice taking on that falsely maternal tone. or you can see it for what it really is. The definitive confirmation that you are worthy of being a Morrison. You've passed every test. You've proven your worth. From now on, you're part of the family, part of the business, part of the future. And if I say no? I asked. Her smile grew colder. Well, then you'll go back to your old life. Your tiny apartment, your nurse's salary, your loneliness. And Brian, well, Brian will meet some more suitable young woman in a few months. The threat was crystal clear. Take it or lose it. Think about it, sweetheart, she continued. You have the chance to become part of something bigger. A family that can open doors you never knew existed. A life of comfort and security. All you have to do is understand that sometimes protection means vigilance. I stood in that office for another 15 minutes in complete silence, processing the magnitude of what I had discovered. Diane and Richard waited patiently, clearly confident that I would make the right decision. And for one terrible moment, I almost did. It was tempting. God, it was tempting. A life of luxury, financial security, a powerful family. All I had to do was pretend none of it had happened, pretend I didn't care about the violation of my privacy, pretend it was love and not control. But then I remembered Thomas, or Jake, or whatever his name was. I remembered the feel of his desperate hands on my arm. I remembered the genuine fear I had felt for his safety. I remembered how I had risked my life to save someone I thought needed help. And I realized that if I accepted this, if I allowed this act of kindness to be turned into a tool of manipulation, I would lose something far more valuable than any amount of money or social status. I would lose myself. No, I said finally, my voice firmer than I expected. Diane blinked, as if unsure she had heard correctly. Pardon? I said no. I stood up from my chair, my legs still shaky, but my resolve growing stronger with every passing second. I'm not going to be a part of this. Rosalie, Richard said, his voice taking on a warning tone. Think carefully about what you're doing. I have, I replied. And I've decided I'd rather have my small, honest life than a big one built on lies and manipulation. When I left the office, Brian was in the living room with two couples I didn't know. Men in expensive suits and women wearing jewelry that cost more than my car. The family friends Diane had mentioned. They were all drinking champagne and talking in hushed tones, as if they were waiting for a celebration. Brian stood up when he saw me, a nervous smile on his face. He had changed into a suit, the suit I knew he only wore for extremely special occasions. Rose, he said, approaching me, you look different. Is everything okay? For a moment, looking into the face of the man I had loved for over a year, I almost changed my mind. He seemed genuinely concerned. Maybe he really didn't know the full extent of what his parents had done. But then he did something that broke my heart and my resolve at the same time. He got down on one knee. There, in front of strangers, in front of the parents who had spied on me and manipulated me, in front of a family that saw love as a business transaction, Brian Morrison got down on one knee and took a velvet box out of his jacket pocket. Rosalie Simpson, he said, opening the box to reveal a diamond ring that was obscenely large and beautiful. Will you marry me? The guests began to applaud. Diane stood in the doorway of the office, watching with triumphant satisfaction. Richard had appeared with a bottle of champagne, ready for a celebration. It was the moment every girl dreams of. The moment I had imagined hundreds of times. The moment that should have been the happiest of my life. And it was the moment I found my voice. I can't, Brian. The silence that followed was deafening. The smile disappeared from Brian's face. The guests stopped applauding mid-clap. The bottle of champagne remained unopened. What? Brian whispered. I can't marry you, I said, looking him straight in the eye. Your family isn't who I thought they were, and you. I paused, studying his face. There was genuine surprise there, but there was something else. A rehearsed quality to his shock, as if he were playing the part of the surprised groom. You knew, I said, and it wasn't a question. Knew what? He asked, but his eyes couldn't meet mine. The last 6 months, the cameras, the tests, Thomas. His irises dilated slightly, just enough to give me the answer I needed. Rose, I don't know what you're talking about. You're a terrible liar, Brian. I grabbed my bag, still the wet, dirty bag I'd carried through that horrible night, and walked toward the door. Each step felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, but each step also made me feel lighter. Before I left, I turned one last time to face the Morrison family and the strangers who had witnessed my public humiliation. For you, I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. That night was a test. For me, it was a lesson. I learned that no matter how much you love someone, if his family sees you as a threat to be controlled rather than a person to be loved, you will never truly be free. Diane stepped forward, her mask of civility finally slipping. You'll regret this, Rosalie. You're throwing away the chance of your life. No, I replied, opening the door to step out into the still drizzling night. I'm saving my life. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the small but honest apartment I had rented across town, drinking instant coffee and watching the rain hit the only window in the kitchen. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and no one was watching me. Brian had tried to reach me 6 times in the first week. Text messages, emails, even showing up at the hospital where I worked. Each time he claimed he didn't know all the details of what his parents had done. Each time he begged me to reconsider. But I had learned the difference between love and possession, between protection and control, between a family and a prison in disguise. In the second week, Diane had tried a different approach, a financial offer. $50,000 to compensate for any inconvenience I might have suffered, in exchange for signing a confidentiality agreement about the Morrison family's misunderstandings. I sent the papers back unsigned. In the third week, the legal threat came. A letter from a law firm claiming that I had stolen proprietary information from the Morrison family, and that I would be sued for defamation if I spread lies about them. I framed the letter and hung it on my kitchen wall as a reminder. Now, sitting at my small kitchen table, writing in a journal I bought to process everything that had happened, I thought about Thomas. Not the actor, Jake Patterson, but the person I had believed him to be. The desperate man who needed help. The man I had risked everything to save. In a strange and twisted way, he had saved me too. Because without that night, without that horrible audition, I would have married Brian Morrison. I would have become part of a family that saw love as a commodity, that saw relationships as investments, that saw other people as pieces in a power game. I would have lost my soul one piece at a time, until there was nothing left of the person I really was. Sometimes, when it's raining hard and I'm driving alone at night, I think about the actor who played Thomas. I wonder if he has nightmares about the role he played. If he understands that it wasn't just a performance, it was the calculated destruction of an innocent person's trust. But then I remember that some revelations, as painful as they are gifts in disguise. Because now I know the difference between true love and sophisticated manipulation. Between a family that loves you and a family that owns you. Between real security and a gilded cage. And that difference saved my life in a way that Thomas, the real Thomas I imagined on that rainy night, could never have imagined. 3 months after that night, I received a letter in the mail. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Brian. Rosie, the letter read, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to tell you something. My parents, they haven't stopped. After you left, they hired a private investigator to follow you. They know where you live, where you work, who you talk to. They're waiting for you to make a mistake so they can prove they did the right thing in testing you. Please be careful. And Rose, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you from them, and I didn't. It will haunt me forever. I folded the letter and placed it in the kitchen drawer, next to the other things I had decided to keep from that night. Not as nostalgic mementos, but as evidence of my own strength. My first reaction was panic. Were they still watching me? Were they still violating my privacy even after I had rejected everything they offered? But then a strange calm settled over me. If they were still watching me, if they were still trying to control me even after I had left, it only confirmed that I had made the right decision. I got up from the table and went to the window. Outside, life went on. People walked down the street, talked, laughed, lived their lives without knowing they were being watched by someone who wanted to turn every human interaction into a test of loyalty. But I knew. And now I also knew that that night in the storm, as traumatic as it had been had given me something that no amount of money or status could buy: the absolute certainty of who I was when no one real was watching. In the end, I was indeed late to the Morrisons' birthday dinner, but not because of the storm or the traffic or even the blind man I helped. I was late because I was about to discover that some families are prisons disguised as homes, that some people see love as a business transaction, and that sometimes the greatest act of self-love is having the courage to walk away. And that on a rainy night in Ashford, Ohio, a 28-year-old nurse learned that there are worse things than being alone, being with people who see you not as a human being, but as an investment to be evaluated. Some storms destroy. Others, as I discovered, clear the air. This story showed us how true personal integrity is always worth more than superficial status and wealth. What do you think of the way Rosalie had the courage to reject a family that saw her only as property to be tested and controlled? Would you have done the same? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this incredible story about discovering who truly loves you versus who just wants to possess you, show your support by hitting the like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more impactful stories of people who chose their dignity above all else. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.